Hello, this is Carl Irwin with episode 3, the next episode in line of the Hacking the Viewport series that I'm putting out. And what we're looking at is the various possibilities that we can utilize via OpenGL, GLSL rendering directly from the viewport, and also using a few extension type processes such as through the VSE, the video sequence editor, or using the viewport as a render platform to render out various passes that might be used in some other compositor, such as in the Blender internal compositor or some other proprietary compositor that you might use. So looking at using the viewport in this way to render out full scenes and also different passes and different layers of scenes that can be used for compositing. And the reason for doing this is so that we can render very quickly and get production grade elements much more quickly than we could if using the Blender internal render engine or the Cycles render engine, or using another 3D platform and other such render engines. And it's not to say that those avenues are unnecessary. They're actually quite necessary if your goal is to get absolute accurate ray traced sorts of images and very complex scenes. Those are very good platforms on which to do that if that's your goal. However, if your goal is to create visual effects or single elements or elements to be composited into a real footage or into another type of pre-rendered scene, then perhaps those types of render engines may be a bit overkill, and OpenGL, GLSL type rendering might be a little bit more appropriate and more accessible with respect to time, especially if you're someone like me that has, this is a hobby of mine. I have computers that have low processing power. I'm not going to spend a lot of money on higher processing power, and because it's just a hobby, I don't put a ton of time into it. Just time that I get here and there in the evenings, on weekends, on holidays, things like that, where I just like to spend some time in my hobby in visual effects and motion graphics. So again, that's the reason for doing this, and if you've already looked at episodes 1 and 2, you can see some of the potential for this. In episode 3, we're going to step away from the original project that we were looking at, that space scene that you can see in the trailer for the series, and also the things that we've done in the last 2 episodes. We're going to step away from that and look a little bit more at the concept of draw order, and also using elements that may not be still images, but rather elements that may be video or image sequences. A big question came up after the first couple of episodes concerning alpha transparency in the viewport, and one question that came up a few times was, would it be great, or rather a comment, it would be great if this could be useful with image sequences or video that have an alpha channel. And my response to that comment is that you can do that. You've actually been able to do that for quite some time. So I want to spend a short period of time here looking at that. Now, this tutorial is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be quite as deep and as advanced as the last one, so hopefully it won't be nearly as long. And the reason being is because a lot of the techniques that we would be using in this tutorial have already been addressed in the previous tutorial. So if I'm moving a little quickly and you feel like something has not been satisfied to your desire, you have a question that you don't seem to have answered, I invite you to look at episode 2, where I'm certain that you will have probably many of those questions answered with respect to using alpha transparent images inside of the viewport and rendering them out. So today we're just going to look at video sequences or video footage that has alpha transparent channels associated with them, and using those in the viewport. And we'll look at some of the other various implications that can be that come out of using those types of file format, those type of elements in the viewport. So let me just show you what we're going to do. This is a short video that I made, and you can see it's just this big explosion, and there's this cloud plume going up. And there's a few things going on in here. First of all, you have this ground desert type scene. There's the light affects the lens. You can see the shadow underneath, and this is a really quick composite. I didn't put a whole lot of time into this, and this just kind of demonstrates how quickly you can get a good result. And let me play one more time here. You can also see as this plays back that there's in the compositing, there's a glow that goes along with this, and it really looks like this explosion is kind of in three-dimensional space within that scene, and that's the goal. There's a few ways that we can do that and get this kind of an element composited in. Now, this is not a smoke simulation that I created. It might be a smoke simulation, but it is actually a prefab element that I downloaded, and it would be very similar to something that you might find in the Action Essentials collection that Andrew Kramer has put out at Video Copilot. This is not part of that. This is actually a freebie, and I just want to point out one of these resources. Last time on the last episode, I talked about cgtextures.com and how everybody should have an account there. This is another website that I found that you might find interesting. It's called footagecrate.com. It's actually a subsidiary of a larger website called Production Crate. And on this website, it has footage, royalty-free video, VFX footage. There's even some sound effects and graphics and other things on there. There's products that are sold as well, but what they do is they give you a number of downloads free every day. 5 downloads once you've registered per day that you can download. And these are really good assets. So if I click on this, you can see, for example, if I go to fire and explosions, it'll open up a sub-page here, and they give you all of these elements, and these are all high definition, and they are pre-keyed. They already have the alpha key, at least most of them do, those that are applicable, and you can see these explosions. Now my guess is that a lot of these explosions are CG generated explosions, perhaps not on Blender, but on some other, Fume Effects or something like that, using another platform. And they have alpha transparency in the video. And the way this works is that these are .mov, QuickTime generated file formats, and in that file format there is the ability to have multiple channels, one of them being alpha transparency. So there's a matte channel that indicates what the alpha transparency ought to be for the video file. And here's the really good news. Blender can read and use those files. I believe also if you are using Blender on a Mac or on a PC, Windows operating system, and you have QuickTime installed, you should have the codecs available to generate these types of files. Now, I'm a Linux user. I don't have QuickTime installed. I have no use for it. There are other alternatives to creating .mov files. You could make an image sequence, or I could render out 2 passes, 2 separate video files, one of the video and then another one as the alpha channel, and then I can use those 2 together. So I don't really have much of a need for this, but nonetheless my Linux operating system setup will read the .mov file format, so I can use these directly in the Blender viewport. So you can download these, 5 a day. And again, high definition, really great assets. You can mix and match these together and cut and edit them and use them any way that you wish. There's a small license that's attached to this. You want to make sure you read that so you're using it for appropriate means. But really great resource if you're not up to spending a lot of money for one of the proprietary types of collections, such as the Action Essentials collection. So anyway, that's an option for you. Also want to point you to another tool that we're going to use today. This user, and I don't want to crucify this individual's name here that they're using, but this is a YouTube user. a follower that has been contacting me. I've been having discussions with concerning some of these things that we've been going over recently, and he has generated an add-on. So I just want to point you to this. I asked permission if he would allow me to do this, but he's created an add-on for Blender that is in progress. I think he's still working on this, and it's a GLSL Tools add-on, and you can find it here at this website at this GitHub location, github.com/TARDIS-maker /GLSL-tools. So if you go to this website, you can download the Python file here, and you can install this into Blender as an add-on. And I'll show you exactly what this does. This is really nifty. It's got two components to it. One of them is making the import images as planes a little bit more accessible via a button in the tool panel, and also it adds a calculate draw order function, which is really cool because as you saw in the last episode, we have to manage the issues with draw order when using OpenGL in Blender, and this fine gentleman has made an add-on that does this to a certain degree. There's a couple of limitations we'll talk about, but it will calculate the draw order by selecting your objects, clicking on this button, and bam, there it is, you're all set, and everything has been recalibrated to be in the proper draw order on the y-axis from the camera. So very useful add-on, and I'm very happy to see this kind of thing, because this is what I was hoping for by doing this kind of series, is that I would inspire some people who have the know-how to generate these kinds of tools and to make the idea of rendering directly from the viewport and getting production value type output more accessible by generating these kinds of tools. So I'm very happy about this, and I wanted to share it with you. And as this updates, as this user keeps updating this and making it better, I will keep referring back to it, and I'll try to demonstrate the tools as they become available. So again, if any of you out there are knowledgeable about creating Python scripts, I'm not going to do that. A lot of people ask me, can't you make this into an add-on? And well, yes, I could if I spent a lot of time learning this. I don't have that much time though to get into that. I don't really have a lot of interest getting into it either. There's a lot of capable people out there that I'm comfortable with taking my ideas and concepts and turning them into these kinds of tools. So I encourage all of you out there to take part and to do this kind of thing. All I ask is that you let me know where your tools are at so I can use them too, because I like it when things are made easier. That's a very, very, very good thing. So again, you can go to this GitHub extension, download the Python script, install it as you normally would, an add-on, and then enable it, and you're good to go. So Footage Crate, lots of great assets with alpha transparency that we're going to use, and this add-on. So I wanted to point you to that. So once again, this is this video that we're going to look at. I also have a second version of it, another application. You can see this, all the things that are going on in there. Another version of this is this one here. You can see slightly different application. So we have a kind of a aerial view, and this, you can see this same type of explosion. I think it's actually the same explosion, same file. You can see the shadow that's on the ground down here. Lots of different composited elements. You can see things that we addressed in the last tutorial concerning lens grit and lighting and all those kinds of things. But we're going to focus on importing these images directly into the viewport. Now, just to prove the concept here, you've been waiting to see this. This is the actual viewport view, and let me just play the scene back to prove to you that what I'm telling you is happening is indeed happening. And there you have it. So we're seeing everything in the viewport occurring in real time. The camera is panning around, quick flash, and then an explosion. We see all the glow. And there it is. Okay, so let's quickly look at how this is put together. I'm going to turn off my only render. I'm going to just break this down briefly. I don't want to, we're not going to build this up completely. We will look a little bit at importing some of these files and how to place them and whatnot, and some of the settings that you can use to manage these video files. But we're not going to generate this whole thing from scratch. I'm just going to break it down for you to demonstrate the concept, because the creation of a scene like this is really covered in the last episode, and again, I invite you to look at that. So what we have here is all of the images that we need to composite together, and we are compositing in three-dimensional space. However, you'll notice in this case, if I play the scene back, you can see the camera is not moving on any axis, but it is rotating, and this is a very important concept to understand when doing compositing and match moving. That there's two types of tracking and moving. There is two-dimensional tracking and match moving, and then there is three-dimensional tracking and match moving. Now, this is not a tracked scene, but it's essentially the same kind of concept that you would deal with in tracking. Right now, because the camera is not moving on the X, Y, or Z axis, it is merely rotating. None of these elements need to actually be tied to any area in three-dimensional space. They can be anywhere between the camera and the furthest most background part of the scene. Because the camera is panning, it never will generate a parallax motion between the elements that are being used. So, more often than not, a really good scene can be fabricated using a two-dimensional composite like this, not using three-dimensional space on the axis, left, right, up, down, forward, backward, and moving the camera, but merely just rotating the camera so as to pan around and look at the scene from one point in space. So we're going to focus on that. However, you could apply this kind of compositing in three-dimensional space, much as you would in another 3D compositor, by placing your assets, as we did in the last episode, in three-dimensional space so that you can use a camera move and move through. Now, just be aware that when you're using two-dimensional assets, that you have some limitation in what you can get away with in camera move before you start to notice that the assets are two-dimensional and are flat. Okay, so just be aware of that. But this is going to be just a two-dimensional composite. We're just placing our assets in space, anywhere in space between the camera and the furthest most background layer. And all of the camera movement is merely a rotation-based movement. Okay, so quickly, animation on the camera while we're looking at that. Some of you may have played around with camera animation before. What I've done is, on the rotation axis of the camera, X, Y, and Z, I've added a couple of noise modifiers. And the first noise modifier is a shake that happens right at the point of explosion, and it's a little bit different for each one of the axes, I suppose, that we are rotating on. So the Z one is a little bit shorter than the Y one, which is shorter than the X one, so that these get progressively they cut out progressively one to the other, just to kind of give that shake a little bit more life. And what we did is we used the restrict frame range option in the noise modifier, and we set it to restrict from this frame 50 to this frame 80, and it's different for each one. So the Y 50 to 70, the Z 50 to 60, so they cut out gradually. Also, I added another noise modifier that's much more broad, and this one applies to the entire strip beginning to end, and you can see how big the strokes are in there, and the settings for those. The scaling is much, much bigger, and whatnot. And this is to simulate sort of just a handheld sort of camera panning and moving, what you would see with someone holding on to a camera in real life. And then this would be the shake that would come from the, I don't know, the vibration or the quaking from the actual explosion, or the camera operator reaction to it. So a little bit of a camera animation in there. Now, you could just lock your camera down and not move it at all and composite a scene together. That would be fine too, a la a typical classic matte painting kind of scenario, where you have your matte painting projected over top of video footage, and the camera is not moving moving at all. It's just locked down in one place. Okay, very, very simple application of three-dimensional effects in 3D compositing. So, so that's the camera move. Now, I don't want to talk about these other assets like the vignette and the lens grit and all this other kind of thing, all these other things, because we did cover that in the last episode. However, I do want to make one mention of the lens grit. In the last episode, I talked about using a light mask layer, and that is not completely necessary. If you remember, what I did is I generated two materials for the lens grit in the last episode. One of them was the lens grit itself, another one was a Fresnel layer, and then I used that in the node compositor to mask where the light would affect it, using a point light to turn on areas. You don't need to do that. If it's on a black background, you could just turn it to a Fresnel material, apply your texture, and set it to a in the game engine, set it to add, and that would be sufficient in that use. However, I did want to show you that concept of using a Fresnel layer as a light mask. So in this case, I didn't use a Fresnel layer as a light mask. I just made the original material a Fresnel material, and I just allowed the light to apply it, to affect it directly in the scene. And you can see here I have a light parented to the camera, and as the scene unfolds, this light will thrust into at frame 50, when the explosion occurs, into these planes. One of them is a big off-white plane, and then I have another orange type plane. These are added to the scene, and then I have my lens grit plane in there, and you can see from the camera view this generates this overwhelming glow at the beginning of the explosion, and that's how that effect is accomplished. So you can see here, playing back, the light will move in, these will be enabled, and then the light will move out as that fades out. Now, one thing I learned using this technique is you want to make sure that your light is big enough so that you don't see any round images. So if this light was really tiny, a small sphere, as it would back away, you would see kind of the outline of the fall off of the light. But because it's so large, it falls off a little bit more gradually, and you just want to be careful with that. Use larger lights than what you think you might need. Whatever the largest light is you can get away with will affect this kind of effect a little bit better. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on back here, which is really probably what you're interested in, is the video files back here. Let's see if we can align our view selected here so we can see what's happening. There's a few layers. There's a layer back here, which is the explosion asset itself, which is an MOV file, and as you import it, it will automatically apply the alpha transparency. We do a little bit of tweaking of this image file in the node editor to refine the alpha channel a little bit, but it will automatically apply when you import this as an image plane. And then there's a couple of other versions in front of it. One of them is a glow, and another one is a light white color. Just uses the core of the glow. And these are composited together in three-dimensional space, but much like what you would see in a two-dimensional kind of a composite, where we have layers on top of each other to simulate various types of effects. Let's look at these one at a time. Also, in the back, there's another layer. If I play this back, actually, you can see what happens behind that light. You can barely even see it. There's a flash, and then you can see there's a layer back here with kind of a this ring that blows out a shock wave, and this is another video file that I got from footagecrate.com, and this blows out away. It's another layer that's back there. Also, underneath all of this, there's one more layer. As this plays out, you'll see here where there is in between these two. This is another version of this same explosion, and I took all of the color out of it in the node editor, and I compressed it down, and I'm using this to generate the shadow of my explosion on the ground, or the shadow of the cloud. So this is the same kind of technique that you would use in any other compositor. Very much the same kind of thing, but we're doing it in Blender in three-dimensional space. Okay, so you see how all these things are stacked up. And then in the very background, we have our background image. And one other asset back here behind this is the flash that we see. right as there you see it. We'll move back. And this is animated by scale. You can see this lens flare element set to X-ray to shine through everything, and you can see it just kind of sets up the initial blast, the initial execution of this explosion in our composite. So all of that goes together, and we will look at how to import these things in 1 second. Just want to show you a little bit more of a refinement here. If we go to the video editor, 1 second. And as this loads in, you can see, as I did in the last episode, excuse me, wrong one, video sequence editor. As I did in the last episode, I import the scene into the another layer, a video editing layer, and down convert the resolution, and I can add a motion blur to that, a little bit of extra, add a noise texture in there to get some film grain, a couple of adjustment layers for various color grading effects, and this is how I output my final scene. So again, this is coming directly from the viewport. This is not pre-composed. This is not a pre-rendered layer. This is exactly what's coming from the viewport, and I've just spiced it up a little bit using some of these tools that we have in the video sequence editor. So that's how the video is put together. Let's look at how we would import some of these image files. I'm going to focus on just using the blast images and the .mov images. We're not going to look at the lens grit and the vignette and all that kind of stuff. We already covered that fairly sufficiently in the last tutorial. So we're just going to focus on the things that are relevant here. Let's open up a new file. And you'll see here, when I open this up, I have added this add-on, and this is where the add-on, that Python script would appear, that Python add-on. GLSL Tools is a tab over here, and if I click on it, you can see that we have this button, Import Images as Planes. Now this is already an add-on that exists in Blender if you enable it, but it's been made a little bit more applicable to GLSL rendering as a part of this toolkit. Right here, I can click on this and it will take me directly to that interface to import an image as a plane, a still image, still frame, or a video. And then this one down here, Recalculate Draw Order, which we'll get to in a moment. Okay, this is the real meat and potatoes of this add-on so far. So you want to download that. You can go to your properties, user preferences, go to the add-ons. You would install from file, go to that file, install it, enable it, and then it would appear here as an extra tab in here. Okay, let's go to the front. I always like to work from the front. View, align, active camera to view. Now I know that I'm using these buttons a lot, clicking on the actual menu buttons, and a lot of you like to use shortcuts. Shortcuts are cool. I'm not that great with many of the shortcuts. However, I think it's important that I use menus for the most part, except for some of the very common shortcuts that we use, like grab and scale and all those kinds of things. Just because I think it's important that people know where to get to these tools. You're not always going to remember the shortcuts, and sometimes it's good to know just where to go in the menu to find the tools. So if you go over to your view, you can align your camera using some of these tools here. We're just going to get rid of the default cube. We're not going to need it. We're going to get rid of the light. We don't need that either. In fact, everything we're going to do is shadeless. We're not going to use any point lights in this one. Let's import an image as a plane. So, by the way, you'll notice here, because there's no objects in the scene, there's only the camera, the calculate as draw order is darkened out because there's nothing to calculate at this point. So, import images as planes. We're going to go to my textures here and find a good background image. We'll just use that same one that I had. And I think it's this one right here. And we want this to be shadeless. Use alpha. I always enable the transparency functions. You never know if you'll use them later, even though this one doesn't have any. And here it is. We'll rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees. We want to go to our viewport settings, make sure that our shading is set to use GLSL. That's kind of the whole point of this. And we will turn on the texture view right here. So if I slide this back in Y space and enlarge it, move it back just a little bit more, scale it up quite a bit, and this will be our background image. we're not going to do any camera animation. We're just going to look at this head on, just look at importing these videos. So next thing we want is an explosion. So let's go to import images as planes again, and we're going to use this again and navigate to the location where I have my images from productioncrate.com, footage crate, and we'll take this explosion right here. And now we do want to make sure that the alpha transparency is enabled. Z transparent and use alpha. Shadeless, we want it to be shadeless. Import the image as a plane, and we're going to rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees, scale it up. I'll just move it back so we have a little bit of room in the foreground to work. And if we move it up on the z-axis, scale it up a little bit more. And from this point right here, because we have GLSL enabled, if I play, you'll see, wham, there's an explosion. See, it works right out of the box. And if I go to my camera, you'll see that we have a problem. You can see this really ugly gray stuff that's happening. And if I render this out, even if I turn this to only render and I render a frame, you'll see that we have our infamous draw order issue. This will not composite properly because I created my images in the wrong order. I made my background image first, then I made a foreground image. And if you remember what I told you about draw order is that GLSL, OpenGL will read objects in the order in which they were created from the foreground to the background, and it will apply the alpha transparency in that manner and only in that manner. And if you create the objects out of that order, you're going to suffer these kinds of problems. So this is where our nifty little tool comes into play, and I'm not going to use it yet. I'm going to use it in a moment here. I want to do a couple things first, though. Let's move this back and kind of get this ordered a little bit better. I'm going to enlarge it just a little bit and move it up on the z-axis, put a little bit more on the horizon, scale it up a little bit more, and let's deal with some of the color issues here. I'm going to, actually before I do that, let's make a shadow of this. So let's duplicate it real quick. And I want to move this one back behind it, put the shadow behind, and go to the camera view again. And we're going to squat this one down on the z-axis quite a bit. And I'll move it down so that it's just below kind of the edge of the explosion. Scale again on the z-axis, bring it down a little bit more. And I'm going to scale it on the x-axis out a little bit, and even further on the z-axis, move it down so that it's not going to extend above the horizon view. We don't want to see it above the horizon because then it wouldn't look like a shadow. Now, it's got all of the color in it. Scale it a little bit more. It's got all the color in it, which isn't good. We want this to appear to be black. We'll take care of that in a moment. Now, what we want to do is we want these images to enact or be enabled at a specific time in our video. We don't want them to occur right on the first frame, even though that's where the video is at. So this is where the texture and material tools are going to come in handy. We'll go to our first one here, and I'm going to click on the material, and we'll move down to the actual texture slot for this, and we're going to click on the frames. I'm going to enable the frames up to 250 frames. That's the size of our scene, and I'm going to change the offset to -50, and what that's going to do is it's going to start our video at frame 50. So if you see, if I hit play at this point, when it gets to frame 50, it will then start. So this is how you can offset your video using this tool over here, setting your frames. Now this will work also for an image sequence. However, be aware that lately in recent builds of Blender, and we're at version 2.72. In recent versions of Blender, this is not working well with image sequences. For some reason, it's not picking up on the images in the sequence all the time when you change the offset. So there's a couple ways to work around that. One thing that I have found is perhaps to bring your footage into the video sequence editor, set your timings there, and render out a full image sequence, including all of the frames that occur before the beginning of your video, and then use that image sequence so you don't have to use the offset. It tends to read better. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to render out your image, what you're going to use as your image sequence, rather than as an image sequence with alpha transparency. Render it out as a video, and then render out an alpha transparent channel. And there's a few ways to do that. You just use the alpha transparent matte and render a video for that. And then what you can do is you can use these two textures together and map them in the node editor together, and then you can use the offset in that way. So a little bit of a pain in the neck right now. Some issues that Blender's having with image sequences and rendering the, or rather recognizing the offset. However, with .mov files, which is probably the common format that you're going to use for this kind of application, it works perfectly fine, really well. So if you have Action Essentials, the package at home, and you use that, those files will work very well in here. Or you can go to Footage Crate, download these videos from there, and use them seamlessly using the offset function. So that's how we do that. We can start our videos in this manner, and it will indicate when we want it to enact and enable. Now we have an issue. We want to change the shadow to a different color. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to my shadow layer, and I'm actually going to name it shadow so we can remember what this is. And notice I'm not keeping track of my foreground to background images like I did in the last tutorial. And that's because I've got my handy dandy Recalculate tool over here. I don't need to be as organized because I have this option that we're going to use in a moment. So we'll call that shadow. We're going to call this one explosion. And now we know which is which. I'm going to go to the shadow one. We'll go to the material setting. I'm going to click on this button right here so that will make it a single user. And then, well, that's it. That's all I'm going to do. So now I'm going to go to the material, and we are going to select on here, use nodes. I'm going to use shader nodes for this one. And I'll open up the node editor. And what we're going to do is we're going to select the appropriate texture, Footage Crate Slow Motion Explosion. And then I'm also going to input the alpha channel. And again, this is in the video. It's in the video as a channel, and you can see it's now been applied. Now we want this to be black. So what we're going to do is we're going to add there's a few ways to do this. Actually, probably the best way to do it is to just add a input RGB, because we're just going to use a simple color. And we'll just set this all the way down to black, and I'm going to input this as the input color value. So now we're using the alpha transparency underneath, and then this black color on the top. Now it's very opaque, so we want to affect our alpha transparent output. So I just want to show you what an alpha transparent channel looks like. If I put this into the color, you can see that an alpha channel is nothing more than a black and white image, and it applies this way, where white represents opaque and black represents transparency. So if we apply this to the color, you can see that here. The white portions are going to be opaque, the black is going to be transparent. We want to make this white part a little bit more gray so that it has some transparency to it, but it still has a little bit of a translucency or opaqueness. So let's do it this way. We're going to add an RGB curve, and we're going to use this curve to tone down the white just a little bit. We'll take the white side of this and bring it down a little bit, and you'll see that it becomes a little bit more gray. Maybe I'll move it down a little bit more. You can see how it's altering this. We don't need to see it at this point. We can move this back down to the color, the black, and we'll move this output up to the alpha. And you can see that we've made this more transparent, almost too transparent. So I'll move it up a little bit. And our shadow is kind of coming into form here. Okay, so that's how we're going to address our shadow. Then we can move that layer around. Let's go to the explosion real quick. And for the explosion, we're also going to enable the node editor, and we'll go in here and select the appropriate texture, which is this first one. And we will apply the alpha transparency to it. Now what we want to do is we want to make this appear to be inside of our scene. So we're going to use some color correction tools here directly in the node editor. Right now you can see that it doesn't really match our scene color tones quite right, and we want to match that. We're going to do some color correction. So I'm going to add a color mix node, and I'm going to put our output video on top, and we will bring the output from the mix node to the color input in the output node. And then on the bottom color, I'm going to select the color chooser, and I'm going to select kind of this brownish color in the background. So you can see the brownish color from the dirt that we have in the background. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my factor weight down to 0.1. We'll start with that and see how that looks. So you can see that we're adopting some of this background color here in this image. And it's still a little bit too much, so we'll go to 0.05, just a little bit of a mix in here to bring this more into form. And I'm going to go to my shadow layer, and we're going to bring down the alpha a little bit more so it blends in a little bit better. Go back to our explosion. You can see how this is starting to composite together. Now if I play this back from the camera view, we see we have still all of our alpha transparency problems, but you can see that at frame 50 it all enables, and we see this happening. Everything's good. Let's fix our alpha transparency. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all of the objects that we have in our scene except for the camera. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on this button, Recalculate Draw Order. What it's going to do is it's going to go through the process of regenerating these images in the proper draw order from foreground to background, so that the first one that would be generated would be the explosion, the second one would be the shadow, and the third one would be the background image here. And if you look now, when we go to the camera view, and if I select on the camera, we no longer have alpha transparency problems, and you can see that as I play this forward from here, our composite is looking a lot better. We're getting better color match here. I might want to add a little bit of a color grade or change my color on my shadow to more of that brown color, but you can see the potential here once you put a little bit of color correction work into this. So you see how much better this is looking already. Now we want to deal a little bit with our image here, our explosion. You can see that we're getting some of this matte line from it, and this is just part of the image sequence or the video file that was generated. We want to get rid of a little bit of that, fix it a little bit. So let's go to our explosion layer, and we're going to go to the node editor, come back here again, and what I want to do is I want to tighten down my alpha transparent channel here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to this a color RGB curve. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the basic color curve, not the the red, the green, or the blue, but just the basic one. I'm going to darken it up a little bit. What it will do is it will tighten up. You see around the edges? It's going to tighten up my alpha transparent layer just a little bit, and it's going to move my matte line in. And you can see how much better this looks already. So now as we play this forward, we see a little bit less of that matte line in there. You can see how much better this composite is looking. My shadow is sticking up above the horizon a bit, so I might want to scale this down on the Z-axis a little bit more, move it down. And again, you have to, do all the compositing tricks that you would do if you were putting this together in any kind of three-dimensional compositor. All those same things apply as they do here, and you can see how much better this is getting already. Now, I want to show you a trick about adding maybe compositing in some sort of glow on top of this. Again, we're not going to make this perfect like we did in our last video, but we're gonna just show you the general applications here. What I want to do is I want to make a different video that has just the luminance layer here so that I can use that for my glow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable my background layers and my shadow layer, and I'm going to go to the world, and I'm going to change the horizon color to black. And if I set this to render only, render view, you can see I'm just looking at my explosion. Okay, and what I want to do is we're going to render this out, this whole sequence as a video file, and we want to isolate just kind of the luminance layer, the fiery kinds of parts to this. So I'm going to go to my explosion real quick. I'm going to add in a temporary curve. So we're going to generate a layer that we can use to composite in here to get a glow. And on this temporary curve, I'm going to add a color curve, RGB curve. And we will bring our video output into this. And this is going to be temporary. We're going to bring this to our color input to the output node. Make sure it connects. And what I want to do is I'm going to bring my curve down, bring up the contrast. So I'm going to bring down the darks quite a bit. And I'm going to pop up the lights quite a bit over here, and you see we're going to bring out this fiery kind of element. So as this plays through, we see a lot more of the fire in there, and we don't really see the smoke anymore. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to output this as a video file. So you see as this plays through at frame 50, we see our fire explosion. And I'm going to output this now as a video file, but I want it to be really blurry. Remember, we don't have any blur capability in the video sequence editor, rather in the viewport editor. Viewport. So we need to generate a way to get blur. What I'm going to do is we're going to hack. We're going to hack this big time. I'm going to change my percentage output down to 5%. Really super low. Now we want to make sure that we have this all set before we do this. We want to make sure that our video, our explosion is properly placed in our scene before we mess around with this kind of a technique. And if I render one frame, you see how small and pixelated this is. You see what that looks like. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to render this as a video, and we'll render this just to an AVI JPEG file, and I'll render it just to the desktop here, and we'll call this glow 5 for 5%. Actually, maybe I'll call it 5 glow so that 5 doesn't run into the numbers that come onto the extension. And we'll render this out, and this is not a big problem because you're going to see how quickly this renders. I'll hit my OpenGL render button and watch this. Wham! This is going to render super quick, this whole sequence. And we can render out everything. We really only need the frames that have fire in it. And you see that once we get to this point, we really don't need any more. I'll just hit escape. We'll stop it right there. And I'm going to render out another version of this. This one's going to be at 10%. We'll call this 10 glow instead of 5 glow, so we know the difference. And we'll render this one out. So, oh, no, we're good. I thought I just was overwriting my file, but I'm not. So we'll render this out once we get past the last frame that has flames in it, and then I'll show you what we're going to do with this. So remember what I told you about Blender dealing with the upconversion of files. So when you have low resolution, it will try to upconvert those files so that it regenerates pixels, and we're going to use this to our benefit because it does sort of do this a little bit in the viewport as well. So we only need to render out that many parts there to it. Let's go back to our 3D view, and so we don't forget, I'm going to bring our resolution back up to 100%. Let's go back to the node editor. We're going to fix this here. We don't want to leave our temporary curve on there. I'm going to leave this node in here, but we don't need it. We're just going to bypass it. Get back to our original output. And we'll turn everything else back on again that we had in the scene. And what we're going to do now is we're going to import another image as planes. So we'll go back to our button here in our GLSL toolkit. And we're going to go to the desktop here where we saved our output. We're going to grab onto 5 glow, import the image as planes, rotate on the x-axis 90 degrees, and I'm going to position this kind of in front of, turn on our off our only render, kind of in front of our explosion. Go back to the camera view. I'm going to scale it up so it's about the same size. And what I want to do is go to the game engine and we're going to apply this as we did in the last tutorial using the Add blend mode. So now we can see what's happening here. We see the this pixelated glow kind of image going on here, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next texture slot, and I'm going to add a new texture, and we're going to add the video file from the desktop, which is 10 glow, and we're going to composite this one on top. So one of them is a little bit more pixelated than the other, and the addition of these two things together is going to help our glow a little bit better. So auto refresh on this one, and you can see that this is sitting on top of the other one now. I want to set this to an add blend mode for the texture, and you can see these two things are adding together now to give us this kind of a glowing output. And we're going to scale it a little bit on the Z-axis and scale it up. We're going to use this now as a glow layer. Now what I want to do is go to the material setting. We're going to enable the nodes, and we'll go to the node editor. And because I rendered this out from frame 1, I don't need to change my offset. This is going to already fit my composite here. And we'll select our material setting, which is going to be 5 glow, and now we can tweak this color a little bit using some of the nodes. So we'll add an RGB curve, and we'll put this on here. We can tighten this up a little bit, bring down the contrast, just to bring this in a little bit, and then we can maybe boost up our red channel to make it a little bit more red, a little bit more fiery looking. Maybe take down the blue just a little bit, give a little bit more of a yellowy tint to it. And you can see how we can play around with this, and now we have this this glowing element in there to composite on top. So if we go back to our camera view, and we play this back, you can see we have a problem. Here's our draw order issue again. So all I need to do is I just have to select my various parts in here, just like we did before. Click Recalculate Draw Order, and we're good to go. Go back to the camera view, and we can play this back. So you can see the potential here for using this draw order tool, and also generating different layers to composite together in 3D space. So a lot of tweaking, and you can end up with our end result that we had before. Again, I added another version of this glow. I just used the same footage, scaled it down a bit, turned it to white, used it for the core, and you know, I added a lot of different things in here to get my final explosion. But we can end up with, you know, an explosion that looks something like this after playing around in this way. So you see the potential for compositing inside of the viewport and rendering directly from there. So that's really all I had to show you, the ability to use video files that have alpha transparency enabled in them in the viewport, and rendering directly from here, and using it as a three-dimensional compositor, and compositing using flat planes in this manner. You notice here that we have a problem, that my glow ends too early, and that has to do with the if you look on the settings for my video, my texture settings, the frames don't go far enough, so we want to set this to 250 frames to go all the way to the end. And also if we go to the other one here, 5 glow, this one doesn't go quite far enough, so we'll go to 250. What it should do is, once it gets to the last frame, it will just apply that last frame all the way to the end. You want to make sure you don't turn on cyclic or cyclic here, so that it cycles around. And one last thing I want to show you, if we go all the way back to the first frame, you don't see it very easily on here, but if you look right here in my explosion frame, you can see the first frame of that hanging on here from the offset. We can get rid of that easily because we can animate our render button, our render tab. So if I go to only render, and I go to frame number 50, where our animation is going to begin, I'm going to enable, I'll right click on the explosion layer, I'll insert a keyframe so that it will turn on at that point, and if I go back a frame to 49 and I turn off the renderability, and then I right click and insert a keyframe, what it will do is, when it gets to that frame, it will enable the renderability. So you can actually keyframe animate the render buttons as well, which is very useful for turning on elements or masks that you're using in compositing. So you can see as I cycle through this, once I get to the proper frame, it turns on, and then my explosion will play out. Okay, you might want to do this with the shadow image here, so that the shadow turns on only when you want it to, not too early, because right now this looks like it's hovering in space. You could also keyframe animate the location of the shadow so that it's closer to the ground, or the place where the explosion meets the ground, and then animate it to move down as it grows bigger. So lots of possibility here in compositing. So concerning all the other things that we did with the lens grid and all that kind of stuff, I would invite you to look at episode 2 where we talk about those kinds of things. But here it is, using alpha transparent enabled video sequences in the viewport editor and rendering. So you can do very, very complex compositing here right from the viewport and render those things out much like you would in any other 3D compositor right from the viewport. So there you have it. That's what I have for you today, including this new tool here that we have available to us. I invite you to download that and use it. As it updates, I will do more tutorials on that, and we'll discuss any new tools that are added to it. So that's all I have for you today. I wish all of you very good luck with these new techniques that I've shown you, and I wish all of you the very best and happy blending.